I'd like to introduce the chair of this session. Many of you know him. He's a familiar face, and we're just so blessed to have his support and to have him come every year to this conference and to lend a helping hand and his wisdom to the United States and the Arab world. Ambassador Fraker, as many of you might know or will know now, served as United States Ambassador to Saudi Arabia from April of 2007 to April 2009 under the George W. Bush and President Barack Obama administrations. To make it short here, he nearly 40 years, his career in banking, finance, and investment, in trade development in the region. Ambassador Fraker founded Fraker and Company, of which he's currently its principal officer, serves on many boards across the world. So without any further ado, you can check his bio out in our program book, but I'd like to welcome Ambassador Ford Fraker, the chair of this session. Ambassador Fraker.
So thank you, Pat, and I want to offer my congratulations to the Council as well on their 30th anniversary, and to thank John Duke Anthony once again for having the courage to invite me back here to speak once again. So the other thing I should say as an addition to my CV is that I've recently joined the board of the Middle East Policy Council, who produced that fabulous publication, Middle East Policy, and if you all do not have a copy of that, you should sign up instantly. So this is the good news panel. After a day and a half of intractable problems, issues in Syria, issues in Egypt, issues throughout the region, U.S. Arab business has to be a bright light. So I'm delighted to be up here sort of representing the business side and offering all of you a little bit of joy in your afternoon. So we have a really good panel today, and what I'd like to do is briefly introduce them. We have Ambassador Patrick Theros, who's the Executive Director of the U.S. Qatar Business Council and former U.S. Ambassador to Qatar, and he's going to talk about business opportunities in Qatar. We have Ken Close, who's the founder and CEO of Quincy International, and formerly the Senior Policy Advisor to His Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal. Ken is a very well-known and experienced business advocate and practitioner in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We have Ms. Nahlah Al-Jubeir, who's the director at the Center for Career Development at the Saudi Arabian Cultural Mission, and the former deputy director for Financial and Administrative Affairs at the Saudi Health Mission. And Nahlah is going to talk to us about some of the excellent work that the Cultural Mission is doing in preparing Saudis for the business environment. And then we have Mr. Nathan Regan, who's the country manager for the United States of the Bahrain Economic Development Board at the Embassy of the Kingdom of Bahrain, and we're going to hear about opportunities in Bahrain. And finally, as a commentator, we have Ambassador Dr. Rene Leon, who's with the he's an economic growth consultant with the Creative Associates International. So briefly, and I understand that we are well behind schedule here, but briefly I just wanted to say that the business opportunities in the Middle East today are fantastic. And the business opportunities specifically for U.S. companies in this part of the world has been getting better and better and better since the financial meltdown of 08 and 09. And as Ambassador Smith very eloquently described earlier, the number of U.S. companies participating in this boom has increased significantly. And one of the points I always like to make, and many of you who were here last year will remember this, but I used to joke with all of my diplomatic friends at the at the embassy that Saudi Arabia, which was created as a nation in 1932, issued the first oil concession to Standard Oil of California in 1933, and it was only 6 months after that that U.S. diplomatic relations began with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So business has always led diplomacy in the Middle East. And from a U.S. standpoint, I think this has always been the case. As one of our U.S. presidents famously said, the business of America is business, and the Middle East is probably as good an example of this as any. So with that, I'd like to call Nahlah Al-Jubeir to the podium to talk a little bit about the work she's doing with the Saudi Cultural Mission.
First, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak at such a wonderful event. As it's been mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the Center for Career Development. It is part of the Saudi Arabian Cultural Mission. The center was established in March 2013 to assist Saudi students in broadening their skill sets and deepening their professional experience by connecting them with potential internship opportunities and also training opportunities in the United States and helping them find jobs in the kingdom with U.S. and American companies. The need for this center became evident when we consider the number of students we have in the United States. So just to let you know, let me give you some data. In May 2013, we had 7,283 students graduate from American college and universities. That's a big number. And currently, the number of students is over 82,500 students in the United States. I could give you a specific number, but by the time I'm finished with my talk, that number would have changed because our numbers are not static. They're continuously changing. They're very dynamic. And also, if we look at historical data, since the launch of King Abdullah scholarship program in 2005, we've seen an average growth in the number of students by about 30% annually. So in 2005, before the program started, we had under 3,000 students, and now we have over 82,000 students. That should say something about the program. And if you further look into our data, our three biggest sectors, majors, are in business and management, in engineering and engineering industries, and information technology. Now, why is the center trying to assist students in finding internships and training opportunities in the U.S.? Well, because of the benefits students will gain from training in the U.S. One is opportunity for translating classroom learning into practical experience. They get exposed to potential employers before making a final commitment to work for that company. And there's also the opportunity for cultural exchange between students and the companies. When a student comes to the United States and he or she attends universities, they get exposed to the academic life. And then with time, through the communities, they get exposed to the social life. By going and working for American companies, they get exposed to the professional life. So that would round their experience in the United States, which is one of the reasons they're being sent abroad for this cultural experience, the other being, of course, the education. Having said that, what are the benefits for companies that partner with the center and provide internships and training opportunities to our students? Well, there are many, and I'm just going to say a few of them. One, by partnering with us, you will have access to a large pool of well-educated Saudi students. Remember, we have 82,000 plus. You will also, by hiring them here, you will lower your overseas training costs. So instead of hiring them in Saudi Arabia and then bringing them to the United States for training, they're already here. So that would reduce the, you don't have to pay the relocation costs. Also, it will give you companies an opportunity to know prospective employees before offering them a permanent job. And also, there will be a cultural exchange between the employees in the U.S. companies and the Saudis. This way, the employees get to know who we are as Saudis, which at times can differ a lot from what you see in the media or the stereotyping. So that can break through these barriers. And by knowing each other's culture, you're less likely to have misunderstandings, which can be very costly to companies. So it's another good opportunity. Having said that, what are the benefits for organizations in Saudi Arabia? Again, they will have access to well-educated Saudi students. They will have lower hiring costs because they don't need to go to job fairs throughout the United States to find our students. They don't have to go through recruiting companies to find our students. We are there for them to assist them reaching those students. Again, another one is the decrease in overseas training costs. I had mentioned earlier, you don't have to bring them over, which the company would then incur relocation costs. And also by Saudi companies hiring students that have studied in the United States, they're hiring people who are familiar with the American culture and they're proficient in the English language. So they become valuable assets and resources to the company that's hiring them, so that when they negotiate with U.S. companies, they're better able to negotiate, because they know where the Americans are coming from. They know the American culture, they know the American language, so there's less likely to be misunderstandings, again, which can be very costly. Now, having said that, how can the companies, connect with Saudi students? Well, we have, companies can post ads on our websites. We have a job board set up that is only accessible to SACM students, which is the Saudi Arabian Cultural Mission students. Currently, we have about 3,000 students that have signed up on the job board, and over 100 companies that are posted jobs on our website, on our job board. And currently, those two means are free of charge. So there's not much you find in the United States that's free, but please take advantage of it. And then the third one are the job fairs. Currently, we have one job fair, which coincides with the graduation ceremony that takes place at the end of May. We're hoping to increase that number to 4 and make some of them more sector specific. We're hoping to have a job fair for healthcare, one for business and IT, and then one for engineering and engineering industries. Okay, now let me give you some examples of positive internship and training programs. We had Al-Anud. She was a second-year software engineer student. She was asked to test a software program. Whenever she tried to run the program, it would crash. It turned out that she was able to find 7 bugs that were affecting the program. Remember, she's a second-year student working for a big company. She was able to find those. Another one was Jafar. He worked in business development and performed an analysis of the training market opportunities for a Fortune 100 company. His recommendations were well received by senior leaders of that company. And then my final example is a major U.S. company had offered over 20 internship programs to our students. The following year, the company offered employment to most of these students. The students now will undergo a 2-year training program before being assigned to their jobs at the company's Saudi operation. So with that information, we encourage you to partner with the Center for Career Development, because we believe it's such a win-win situation for everybody. For more information, I have left some flyers outside in the atrium, or you can contact me or the center. We are located inside the Saudi Arabian Cultural Mission building, which is in Fairfax, Virginia. You can also reach us, you can also check us out at www.sacm, which is SACM.org, or you can email us at ccd for Center for Career Development at sacm.org. Thank you for your time. That's about it.
Just to put some of those student numbers in perspective, Nahlah told you that we have now over 80,000 Saudi students in the U.S. To put that into context, immediately prior to 9/11, the total, the maximum number of Saudi students in the U.S., I think, had reached about 14,000. Immediately post 9/11, it went down to 2,000. When I arrived in 2007, the number had gone up to 11,000. And so to have gone from 11,000 to 80,000 is a remarkable increase, due principally to King Abdullah's scholarship program, but also to the hard work of the Saudi embassy. So I just wanted to recognize that. Moving on, we're going to hear next from Ken Close. As I said, the founder and CEO of Quincy International, and Ken will talk about business opportunities specifically in Saudi Arabia.
Can I talk from here?
You can.
Does that work? Okay, good. So let me say a couple things before I start. First about Nahlah. She's a little too modest. We've been working with her for one of our clients to find postdoc students, and of the 82,000, there are about, I'll probably get this wrong, but I think there are about 2,000 postdocs. Doctoral candidates, and then each year about 800 of those come up as postdocs, as finish their doctoral work. And for our client in particular, this was important. And the data that they have and their ability to communicate with these kids and understand exactly where they are and what kinds of candidates there are quite extensive. So I do recommend working with her and her team. It's very rewarding, and a lot of these kids are really sharp and become useful very quickly. Let me jump into my remarks. I'm trying to keep them really short today, so hopefully we can have a bit of a conversation at the end of this with some questions. I thought I would begin by borrowing a theme from one of our earlier speakers at the conference, my friend and mentor, Prince Turki Al Faisal, when he talked about change and no change. But don't worry, it's going to be in a business context. We're not going back to foreign policy, and as Ford said, this is a good news panel. And it is a good story. So I'll focus on specifically how to be successful doing business in the Middle East. And since we have a very short period of time, this will not answer a lot of questions, but it'll set the stage for it, hopefully. Specifically Saudi Arabia, because that's where we focus. By way of background, as Ford said, I run a merchant bank that specializes in the kingdom, and we help our clients every day answer that question: how do I be successful? Where can I play, and how do I win? One way to put this in context is to look at how business requirements have changed from the Saudi perspective instead of from our perspective over the last 35 years, since the first oil boom, if you will. What have businesses had to do differently over those years in order to be successful in a place like the Kingdom, which I think has great, it's analogous to other places in the Middle East, but it's what I know, so we'll stick with that for now. Initially, it was simply a matter of selling your products there. Quite pure and simple. There was a gold rush on, and people needed to buy stuff, and if you had something and you could actually get it through the port of Jeddah, which was very difficult, you could sell it. Soon the market demanded that you support and maintain your products as well, because it's a harsh environment and they tend to break down quickly. In the early days, that largely meant sending it back to the country of origin for repair or replacement. The obvious next step was for companies to be required to support their products and maintain them locally in the kingdom. And then the next step after that was to do it with Saudis, to Saudaize and to train Saudis to maintain and support that equipment, and perhaps even set up regional hubs where other equipment that you sold elsewhere in the region could be repaired there in Saudi Arabia. That's a long process. It's still going on. Even today, GE is taking big steps to finally localize the production of their turbines, for which I think the market was something like 80% of the market for that particular turbine was Saudi Arabia. But it took them a fair amount of time to get there, but they've done it, and quite successfully, I have to say. More recently, the market began to demand even more local content, and this is where you hear things like technology transfer and knowledge transfer, but effectively what it meant initially was manufacture in the kingdom. And there are lots and lots of joint ventures. Hundreds of them were set up to manufacture things in the kingdom. That's a lot of change in 35 years. That's a lot of different business cycles, if you will, if you want to just use that word for a minute. So let's look at what hasn't changed. We talked about change and no change. What hasn't changed throughout that time period? And I think here's where you'll start to see how to be successful, perhaps, a little bit. What hasn't changed is really quite simple. What hasn't changed is that to be successful, you have to be proactive about your relationships with your customers. You have to listen to them. What hasn't changed is that success requires you to align your interests with theirs. The good news is that Saudi Arabia has made it very clear what their objectives are. One place you can find it where it's laid out quite precisely is in the National Industrial Strategy, but there are many departments, many ministries that have laid out this strategy quite effectively. And in a nutshell, it's quality job creation, it's technology transfer and knowledge transfer, but all of this feeds right into broadening their industrial base away from hydrocarbons in part, but not exclusively. So if you go back and just quickly look at the sort of arc of that development cycle, in the early days, it was all about basic infrastructure, and it was about building that core industrial base around hydrocarbons. And there was another big focus, which was speed. It had to be done fast, and it was done fast. Today, the focus is switched to sort of quality of development. I think I'd look at it, and I'd think about it as terms of quality as opposed to quantity, as opposed to just pure infrastructure. And they're looking for a vast expansion of a different kind of infrastructure, and that's what Nahlah was talking about, which is the knowledge infrastructure. And this king in particular has done a lot to change that. But now's the time when the companies have to start to pick up the baton and help, because it's one thing to educate, it's another thing to enter the workforce and to be productive in the workforce. So Saudi Arabia has been very proactive about their economic development, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. And for us to be successful, I think we just have to listen. And then align ourselves with those objectives, and we will be successful as well. What does that mean? That means becoming a partner more than being a vendor. And you can do that quite effectively. You'll sort of end up in a natural way in that position if you do align yourself with their objectives and act on it. It's hard. It's not easy. But so, as Winston Churchill said a long time ago, there's nothing wrong with change as long as it comes in the right direction. And I would say pretty clearly from a business perspective that this new direction that Saudi Arabia is in now, this requirement that we spend a lot more time focused on how to develop economic value in the country with Saudis, is the right one, clearly, for them. It's also one we can all benefit from if, and quite easily, if we listen well and work together as partners. So I'm happy to give specific examples during the Q&A session, but I just want to set it up like that.
One other comment to set the scene is, as most of you know, certainly the GCC states have a huge level of income at the moment. Saudi Arabia, for instance, with oil prices at over $100 a barrel, their daily revenue is close to $1 billion a day, and that's serious money in anybody's context. The other countries in the Gulf, likewise, are benefiting from huge revenues. And this, of course, means large spending programs sponsored by the governments and, therefore, huge opportunities on the business side. So I'd like to turn next to Ambassador Patrick Theros, who's the Executive Director of the U.S. Qatar Business Council, to talk about opportunities in Qatar.
Thank you very, this working? Thank you very much. Talking about opportunities in Qatar is something that could take perhaps most of this afternoon and well into the morning. We have
8 minutes.
I'm actually going to speak for a little less than that. Anyway, we have a program of infrastructure development leading up to the World Cup in 2022 that is exceeding $180 billion projected. There are the government of Qatar has dedicated 2% of GDP into the foreseeable future for research, development, and education and related issues. The opportunities for American companies are, frankly, almost endless. What I would like to talk to today, however, is about a couple of the challenges that we face. Our mission statement at the U.S. Qatar Business Council remains to enhance the relationship between the two countries. We believe that expansion of commercial and financial relationships plays a critical role in enhancing that relationship. In that regard, particularly in the Arab world, I have no doubt that enhancing personal relationships, getting people to talk to people, is the foundation on which we're going to build our future. One of the glories of the free enterprise system is that once we get people with skill, good intentions, and reasoned pursuit of mutual interests into the same space, usually we can count on these people to create a mutually beneficial outcome. Unfortunately, circumstances have combined to make that getting the same people into the same space a bit more difficult. There are so many places where government action a changing environment, many other factors have just gotten in the way. Some of those changing circumstances are of our own making here in the United States. Just to cite a couple of good examples. Since the beginning of my foreign service career in '63, I've been convinced that recruiting Arab students into American universities has been the bedrock of building relationships. 4 years at a university burns loyalties, friendships, and future preferences into your mind. All of us know that it often determines where the graduate may go for his honeymoon and where he takes his kids on vacation. It also means that he's now got friends to do business with. Serving in Jordan, and this is to talk about loyalty for schools, I once hosted the president of Georgetown University, my alma mater, at dinner and put out the word to as many GU alumni as I could find. It was about 30 or 40. 135 people showed up that day, representing virtually every sector of Jordanian society. Unfortunately, we seem to be doing our best to make it more difficult for Arabs to study here. As Ambassador Fraker said, we at least have, I believe, turned the corner, but a lot of damage was done from 9/11 on. In the 1960s, the U.S. government offered thousands of undergraduate scholarships. In my first week as Vice Consul at Tehran in '64, I processed a U.S. government scholarship and visa to the very first girl from Bahrain to go to university in the United States. Today, the U.S. offers virtually no undergraduate scholarships. In the aftermath of 9/11, we revoked the I-20s of literally thousands of Arab students because their names bore some relationship to someone on some watch list. For example, I got personally involved trying to help the daughter of a UAE friend whose I-20 was revoked between her junior and senior years at a well-known New England university because, as we discovered 3 years later, she shared a patronymic and a family name with a 50-year-old Afghan mujahideen. 12 years later, the last time I checked, her name was still on the watch list. Since then, we've taken the visa function away from embassies, which are the only part of the U.S. government that really knows who we're issuing visas to, and turn it over to a faceless and unaccountable army of computer processors in a number of dysfunctional domestic security agencies. Add to that the rudeness with which Arab visitors are frequently treated at U.S. airports, some worse than others, and we should not be surprised that we discourage both students and tourists. On the bright side, a few American universities have taken the initiative and the risk of setting up shop abroad. Let me engage in a little bit of boosterism. I believe that the Qatar Foundation has initiated in Qatar the most successful such experiment with the establishment of Education City. This is a campus that houses the branch campuses of 6 of the most prestigious U.S. universities: Georgetown, Texas A&M, Carnegie Mellon, Northwestern, Cornell, and Virginia Commonwealth. What sets Education City apart is that these campuses have a seamless relationship with the home school, matriculating students into the home school and graduating them with a homeschool transcript and diploma, which means when the kid graduates from the Foreign Service School at Georgetown in Qatar, he has a transcript that presented to graduate school. They don't know if he would graduate from Foggy Bottom or from Qatar. But I'd also like to talk about people going in the other direction, the question of Americans going abroad. I think we can prove empirically that the more Americans working in any particular country, the deeper the social, cultural, and even commercial relationships. Americans living and working for companies anywhere in the GCC, and especially Americans working in management and decision-making jobs, will skew the direction of business decisions and the procurement of goods and services to the United States, whether they do this consciously or unconsciously. And I also believe fervently that despite higher wages, the productivity of American employees makes them highly competitive and sought after. That is, until the Congress of the United States decided in its wisdom to try to make them uncompetitive. In a series of ill-considered decisions, based on grandstanding about a small handful of rich Americans who hide their earnings and wealth abroad, Congress decided to make it impossible or extremely expensive for companies abroad to afford to hire senior Americans as executive. Let me just quote something from a recent Economist article. The U.S. is the only advanced country that chases its nationals, even those who have no links to the United States, for a slice of their worldwide earnings. Most of the 7 million plus Americans living abroad end up owing nothing, either because of the $95,000 exclusion or because they get credit for foreign tax payments, which are often higher. But they have to fill out tax forms for which a professional may charge more than the taxes owed. However, and this is where the problem begins, for those with families abroad, the costs have become unbearable. The IRS now includes all housing allowances, vacation travel, and tuition payments for children as taxable income. In the past, it calculated compensation for extremely high rentals in some countries. Now it's all in the same pot. Personally, I find lumping tuition compensation as income is outrageous. Every American child is entitled to a free public education, and even minimally adequate American equivalent public education is almost never available abroad. In Qatar, the American school tuition exceeds $25,000 per kid per year. An executive with 3 children will face an additional tax burden of about $30,000, which adds either to his cost or to the cost of the company that hires him. Furthermore, we've placed new and onerous requirements on filing. The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, the FATCA of 2010, which will take effect next year, imposes an array of new reporting obligations, especially on foreign financial institutions that serve Americans. This was designed to catch tax dodgers, but it basically is scaring foreign financial firms and banks away from even treating Americans as customers. Ordinary Americans abroad now have trouble setting up foreign bank accounts or investments, and have even had existing accounts closed. Many foreign banks have told Americans abroad that they cannot use their accounts to buy securities. The earlier legislation, known as FBAR, placed murky and often opaque and always complicated reporting requirements that makes it impossible for Americans without expensive tax lawyers to know that what they must report. FATCA, which follows it, will ensure that none of the innocent will escape. The IRS states it will not penalize those who made unintentional past mistakes, but sorting out the mess will take a year, 2 years, and could cost you $20,000 in legal fees. If you got it wrong, penalties for non-filing can be up to 50% of the account balance. The IRS, however, insists that going easy applies only if taxpayers enter the so-called voluntary disclosure program, which in turn will put their jobs at risk. Why would any non-American company promote Americans to executives if that requires them to open their books to the American Tax Service? Several examples in Qatar. American executives who are 49% owners of companies in Qatar are now giving up any signing authority for their companies because it will otherwise open the company books to the intrusion of the IRS. Problem is that I don't think there are very many American congressmen who really care very much about this problem. The expatriate Americans usually don't vote in congressional elections. They're rarely a constituency in any one congressional district. In fact, I doubt most of these members of Congress know what an expatriate really is. In today's globalized world, American workers are a highly competitive and hot commodity, but are becoming a liability for foreign companies or even for U.S. companies working abroad. Many American companies in the GCC have no U.S. citizen executives working there. The one exception to this, as you can expect, is the only firms that seems to be able to afford keeping Americans abroad are the lawyers. In any event, a little bit of my soapbox, but I am trying to make sure that we get a fair share.
Tell us how you really feel on this issue.
Thank you very much.
So next I'd like to ask Nathan Regan to come to the podium or stay in his seat, whichever he prefers, and talk about Bahrain. Thank you.
Thanks. So my name is Nathan Regan. I'm with the Embassy of Bahrain with the Bahrain Economic Development Board. I'm not a policy wonk, so I know nothing about foreign policy as it pertains to the Middle East, but I have worked for almost all of my career in foreign direct investment and export promotion. I worked in my previous positions with the French Foreign Ministry and the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I'm glad that the Bahrain government has allowed me to take this position. So today I want to talk about business development and how the Bahrain government is focusing on business development. Bahrain actually has a free trade agreement between the United States and Bahrain, which allows the free flow of goods and services into and out of the kingdom. And when we tell the story about Bahrain, it's not really all about Bahrain, right? It's about Qatar, it's about Saudi, it's about Oman, it's about the GCC, right? So U.S. companies, which is who we're dealing with on a daily basis, if they're looking to the GCC as an export market or an investment market, we of course think that Bahrain is a place that they should come and locate. There's 0% corporate tax So for U.S. companies who are setting up as a favored company in the kingdom, they have a 0% corporate tax, 0% personal income tax, which is an added benefit to business development in the kingdom, right? We have 5 key sectors that we're working on, and we are traveling around the country in the United States at trade shows, meeting with companies at those trade shows, and of course setting up congressional-led delegations into and out of the kingdom. So we are working together with our neighbors sometimes to actually put together programs for U.S. companies to go into the GCC. They can spend 2 days in Bahrain, 2 days in Qatar, 2 days in Dubai, and really get a feel and a flavor for how business is conducted in those countries, right, in those kingdoms. Certainly one of the other benefits for doing business in Bahrain is the ability to own U.S. company to own the corporation 100% wholly owned subsidiary, right? So you're not forced to actually take a percentage partner for a local partner, that is, for doing the business. So there's a story to be told for Bahrain and about how they're actually doing the business development in the kingdom. It certainly is focused only on business development, at least from our organizational standpoint. We are trying to take advantage of the free trade agreement and the tax benefits that will allow U.S. companies to actually come into the kingdom, do business in the GCC, from the kingdom into our neighbors, and also in Bahrain. And that's the mandate that we have from our organization here in Washington. And in the interest of time, I'll secede the rest of my comments.
This is great, short but sweet. So our final speaker will be Ambassador Dr. Rene Leon, whose title on the agenda is commentator.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and to congratulate the U.S. Arab Council on behalf of Creative Associates, and we're very proud to sponsor this event. I think that from hearing to all the presentations, one big conclusion is that the worst of times can be the best of times. And I think that that's exactly what the Arab world is doing, trying to take advantage to move to a knowledge economy, doing their own efforts, we heard during the launch, at their own pace, according to their culture and tradition, but moving forward. We're very happy in our company to see that most of the Arab countries have their own vision for the future, whether it's 2020 in Oman or 2025 in Saudi. They have a very clear roadmap of where they want to go and how they want to get to these points. And what we're hearing now from the speakers is precisely that they know what direction going, the direction where they're going. I think that the effort by the Center for Career Development has to be commended. On and on and on, our company's experience is that unemployment among well-educated university graduates is growing exponentially in some countries, including countries in the Middle East. And I think that it's very important that the government is giving a service to students that traditionally one expects that universities will provide to students, and to have a government having its critical mass that will work in the construction of the future to provide these experiences to be exposed to this technological and knowledge transfer for a leap to a knowledge economy. I think that it has to be commended, and it's win-win, it's smart, and I think that other countries should look into this effort. Ken Close talk about the business opportunities in Saudi Arabia and how you can be successful there. The evolution has basically in the last 35 years that he mentioned, it's an evolution that where the market is getting more consciousness, where demand-driven customers are asking for their rights, but also are sending the signals for companies who want to establish business there. I think that the most important comment that I will have in this case will be that to be a partner rather than a vendor, it's a key to success, not only in these markets, but it's a key to success in almost every market. And it's very interesting to know that technology transfer, knowledge, broadening the industrial base, and being a complement of the vision that a government has will ensure a company's success in a market like Saudi Arabia. Then we have Theros posing challenges for strengthening the trade relationship between countries, specifically in this case between Qatar and the United States. Being myself an immigrant, I clearly understand what he's talking about in terms of restrictions to students, restriction to study in the United States, revocation of I-20s for students, and it actually suppresses what the Embassy of Saudi Arabia is doing. It curtails the opportunity for these students to have a critical mass and then go back to their countries and become U.S. allies. Being, frankly speaking, myself, I am a Fulbright student, and I came to the United States to study as a Fulbrighter, and I then ended up to represent my country's interest to the White House for 15 years. And I think that if that's the logic, and Fulbright had it right 40 years ago, some sort of considerations should be made to restrictions, not only to bring students from Arab countries without, not ignoring security matters, but also in terms of the equal treatment, national treatment to American citizens that work and do business in the United States and work and do business in a country like Qatar. To deny national treatment to your own citizens is a concept that it's very rare, to tell you the truth. But coming from Congress and myself dealing with Congress for the last 15 years, I only remember what Winston Churchill used to say: Americans always do the right thing after exhausting all other possibilities. So U.S. Congress, I think it's an institution that you have to force to act in some ways. And this I will close this comment with what Regan said, and this is very important. I think that part of the solutions to whatever trade restriction and investment restrictions are there with the Arab countries lies in the fact that a free trade agreement will ensure national treatment to Americans, which is a little bit, again, weird. In a former life, I was a trade negotiator, and we were always demanding national treatment to our own national. And the only way, actually, to ensure the national treatment to your own national, but the nationals to your own country, could be through a free trade agreement. That also gets rid of the fact of double taxation and brings a lot of benefits. So I think that the region in general should explore more the perspective of having a free trade agreement with the United States. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, is Bahrain, is Morocco, is Oman. And I think there are too few countries in the Arab world who have explored free trade agreements with the United States. And I think that in a global economy, and if they want to move to a knowledge economy, I think that that's the path to follow, free trade. Thank you so much.
So we have plenty of time for questions, which is pretty unusual for this conference, but delighted that that's the case. I think the system this year is to write questions down on the pads that are at your tables. I don't see many of those pieces of paper making their way up here, so we can shortcut this by simply asking people if they do have questions to raise their hand. I'll recognize them. I'll ask you to speak up so everyone else can hear you. If you aren't able to do that, I'll try and translate. Sir.
Tom Musgrave. I have a question for the Ambassador Leon. Would dual citizenship help Saudi Arabia and all the neighboring nations where children have dual citizenship up to the ages of 18, not to have to choose a nationality? That would help the Americans, it would help the nationals, and it ends the prejudice and the fines and a lot of things that are used to complicate lives for Americans and internationals. Is that a possibility, and do we have any dual citizenship?
Well, I have to do a disclaimer here. I'm not perfect. I'm not a lawyer and not an immigration lawyer. But your question from a business point of view, I think it's very important. There was a time where free trade agreements, for instance, like NAFTA with Mexico, will include trade visas and business visas for Mexican nationals who want to do business in the United States. And I don't know, for instance, if that possibility has been exhausted or not, but it will be very interesting to figure out what will be the reaction of including facilities in terms of immigration to business people, and why not, to students. In terms of dual citizenship, it depends on the national context. I know many countries in the world, specifically from Latin America, for instance, where you can hold a passport of the United States and a passport of the country of origin. Of course, that facilitates matter, that simplifies matters. And it's only if you want to participate in a political process or in a political election, or you want to do something that it's you want to become an elected official, that you will have to surrender one of your passport. I think that globalization implies the possibility to legally be a citizen of the world. And if that can be materialized in terms of having 1, 2, 3, 4 passports, I think that will be a very important for moving forward to the United States and other countries in the world.
Okay, we have received a few written questions, and I have one for Nahlah. And the question is, are the students able to remain in the USA on their student visas during their internships?
Well, the U.S. government allows students training or post-graduation training for 1 year and still on the F1 visa. So that's another benefit for companies who want to hire Saudi students here, train them here, and then send them to their branches in Saudi Arabia or their subsidiaries or partners, is that they can be here for 1 year. They can work on that while they're on the F1 status. If they're STEM students, which are science, technology, engineering, and math, that 1 year can be extended for another 17 months, so a total of 29 months for those students. And recently, I heard something about an H3 visa, which is a training visa for students who don't qualify for the STEM extension, where the company can sponsor the student on a training basis. The restriction being that the training that the student receives in the United States is not available in Saudi Arabia, and that when the training is completed, the student leaves the country to go back home.
Okay, thank you. One of the other questions has to do with ways in which Saudi Arabia can motivate people to come and visit. How can they make the visa process easier? And having spent a good part of my time as ambassador working on the visa issue, I think it's fair to say that if you want to come to Saudi Arabia on business, we've done everything possible to make that a lot easier. One of the things we were able to do is to generate 5-year multiple entry visas for Americans to come to Saudi and for Saudis to come to the U.S. This is one of the reasons that you've seen such a dramatic rise in the number of Saudi students here in the U.S. But it really is all about a focus on business. I don't believe that Saudi has a category of tourist visa per se. That perhaps is something that will come in the future. But certainly the topic of this discussion is business, and if anyone wants to come to Saudi Arabia on business, you can get a visa. We have another question that concerns current policy and other obstacles to expansion in the telecom and information technology area in the Middle East. I don't feel qualified to answer that. I wonder if Ken might have some thoughts, or any of the other panelists might have some thoughts on information and information technology policies or obstacles.
I can't think of any obstacles in particular with regard to Qatar. The Qataris have created a rather remarkable institution that was originally known as ICT Qatar, under the leadership of a remarkable woman, which has been sponsoring research, development, and implementation of telecommunications and other internet and IT policies. It is now morphed into a full-scale ministry. It is a field into which the Qataris are prepared to put a significant amount of resources and are always looking for new ideas, new technologies that can be incorporated into what they're doing. They have also an excellent reputation in terms of protection of intellectual property, a change over the last 10 years, I must admit, but a change for the better.
Thank you. Obviously, Ambassador Theros struck a nerve with a number of people who've had the experience of being expats overseas. You know, this is it's an ongoing issue that all the U.S. embassies have to deal with in their countries because there are U.S. Expats living there, and the tax problems that he alluded to are common everywhere. Most of the embassies and the business, certainly in Riyadh, there's the American Business Group in Riyadh, and the American business groups throughout Saudi Arabia organize an annual door knock, as they call it, where a group of them come over and spend a week to 10 days up on Capitol Hill, knocking on senator and congressmen's doors, lobbying on behalf of the expat community. It's a very tough sell because the politics of it, as has been pointed out, aren't compelling for many people on Capitol Hill. In many ways, probably the most effective way of doing this is to invite our Saudi, Qatari, and other friends to come over and do that marketing for us, because often what you hear in these countries is that you have American companies coming in and setting up, but where are the Americans? And in many parts of the world, if you invited an American company to come in and work in your country, you want Americans to represent that company, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. And that's certainly a theme that I hear, and it will be a battle that we will continue to fight. Yes? So do you want to start on that one, Nahlah? Or are you happy to pass to Ken?
That's a tough one. I would say that there probably are a very large number of jobs held by expats in these countries, particularly Saudi Arabia. That's, again, where my experience lies, that could be filled by Saudis. And so I would probably disagree with that statement, although statistically I don't know if I'm exactly right or not. But the reason I would disagree sort of in principle is that I think the stories I hear from companies, it's very hard to find a Saudi who can do X, whatever they're looking for at a particular time. And it's very possible they haven't looked hard enough. It's also, there are a lot of factors that sort of figure into that. I think one thing governments forget when they're in charge of labor programs is that, and this is a controversial thought, it's fine to hire people, but you have to be able to fire them, because otherwise there is no work ethic. So if you really want to improve your job market, you've got to give labor, it has to be able to move freely, both ways. And that's very hard for governments. It's very hard for governments that privatize, for example. Look all over Latin America when they privatize giant phone companies and giant sectors of the government. You end up losing a lot of jobs. And so it's difficult, it's painful. And so I think creating jobs or replacing expats is fine. But then you've got to be able to make sure that the people who show up for work are going to show up every day. And if they don't, they can get fired. That's really hard to do. So it's really easy for labor ministries in any country to mandate certain hiring requirements. They never mandate firing requirements. They never give you the freedom to fire, or often, I shouldn't be very careful here, but often don't. So I think it has to go both ways if you're actually going to have an effective workforce. So I'm sort of somewhat off topic, but that's my...
So we have a lot of people up here who want to comment on this. So I'll start with Dr. Leon.
You have more experience than me, I'm sure.
Very quickly, we have been doing programs, workforce development programs in some countries around the world, and been following very closely the situation in the Middle East. And the situation is the same. I just will give you a rough example of the situation, for instance, in the healthcare sector in Saudi Arabia. In 1970, out of the total physicians in the country, only 21% were Saudis. Currently, in 2013, out of 66,000 physicians in the country, only 22% are Saudis. So that data reveals a lot of truth of what is happening there. It's not a lack of employment. It is, I think, they have to better refine their manpower demands, their manpower models, and align their policy accordingly. Same situation you can find in the tourism sector, the same situation you will find in the finance sector, the same situation you will find even in the oil sector. So it's interesting because it is not lack of employment. I think it's lack of planning in terms of good planning in terms of manpower models.
Thank you. Nathan?
And cost, because local employees cost more. You can't hire a local Saudi for a particular job, let's say, and pay them the same as you would a third country national from from a country where labor rates are much lower. So there's a lot of factors that fit. I didn't realize the statistics were that stark, though. That's interesting.
Nathan?
Just a couple points from the Bahrain standpoint. From a cost perspective, actually, the Bahraini government, they have a labor fund that they actually train locals to do the jobs that U.S. companies are looking for, and they provide that as a free service. And in addition to that, they also subsidize the salary of the person who is actually working for that U.S. company. So the government has been very proactive about trying to increase that type of Bahrainization that we have in Bahrain. And I also wanted to comment on one thing about a recent law that's changed in Bahrain that allows workers to actually move freely from job to job. It can be, or it has been historically, that some workers who can't leave their position because they're not authorized to do that. And Bahrain has actually changed that law recently. So now workers can move freely. Going to your point about moving freely from job to job and be able to move around is very important.
Yeah. Ambassador Theros?
In Qatar, just to give you one small statistic to prove it's not a labor employment issue. Right now, the best guess, the numbers are a little bit fluid, is that Qatari citizens make up about 5% of the total labor force. There is anybody can work. The Qatari government is most interested in using the foreign companies that are there for skills transfer, for transfer of technology and personal skills. Occasionally, and I have to fault them, they have failed to articulate this properly. The companies in return are usually operating on such high margins that the easiest thing in the world is create some nothing job and put this poor kid into it. Whereas the Qataris would be perfectly happy to see an American company take this kid and put him in an office in Oslo or Stockholm. What they want is somebody to be properly trained, somebody end up being a real productive employee of the company that hired him. He need not be in Qatar, and in many cases I think they would prefer that he not be there. But there is frequently a failure to articulate on the part of one side and the other side taking the easy route and just creating a fake job.
Yeah. One comment here is that employing locals, Saudiization if you will, or Qatarization, Bahrainization, whatever you want to call it, these are political objectives, and the problem is when they butt up against the realities of the marketplace on the ground. And it's one thing for a Saudi owner of a company to be told that 30% of his positions have to be Saudi. It's another thing when he sits down and does those numbers and decides that, his business isn't profitable if he has to do that. And that's where these issues are coming to the fore.